let me pull up his slide. Dr. Anthony Hood has a couple of assignments, probably many with UAB. He's the Director of Civic Innovation in the Office of the President, and also in the Collat School of Business. And so Dr. Hood, with our idea of resilience and teams, you came to mind right away as someone who could contribute your expertise and experience with those things. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. And I'm actually trying to share my screen. So if you give me the ability to do that, I'll share.
Okay, you should have it. Let's see. I'm gonna stop my share.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I've got you as a co-host. Let me see if there's another place I can have you as a co-host. And William, if you can jump in.
I just changed.
I think we're good.
Yeah, you should be able to do it now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. Well, good morning, and thank you again, Jerry Ann, for inviting me. I had the pleasure of presenting to this group last year, and it was a lot of fun. What we're going to talk about today is building and leading effective teams, particularly with a focus on resilience. I think resilience is something that's top of mind for all of us in this new environment that we find ourselves in, because we've had to be adaptable and we've had to change. One of the things I want to start by talking about is, what is resilience? And I'm sure this is something that you all have talked about in this speaker series, but the way I see resilience, and it's defined as the ability to recover from some type of loss or some type of challenge. And that's essentially what resilience is. And so resilience, the base of the definition suggests that you have actually encountered a challenge. And so resilient people have built up the resources to be able to overcome whatever challenges that they may have. The way I liken it to is a theory that we use in organizational science called conservational resources theory. So in conservational resources theory, we understand that, we all have challenges. We all have to mobilize our own resources to be able to meet the demands of life. And so with that, we have resources, and we all start with a different baseline of resources. Some may start higher than others. And throughout the day, we draw upon those resources to do our job, to engage with our teams, to engage with our supervisors. And then when we get home, we have to manage all the demands of our personal lives. The challenge with that is, now that we're in this work from home environment, that line between work and life, personal and professional, is being blurred. And so it's really important that we're able to mobilize our resources and use those to meet the demands. When we're working in teams, there are a lot of different things that will draw upon those resources. And let's say if we start at the mid-level as for what our resource stores are. We get to work, we're working with our teams, we're having to manage calendars, we're dealing with customers, clients. For those of us who are teachers, we're working with students. When those resources are drawn down, we run the risk of having all of our resources depleted. And when our resources are depleted, that's when we start feeling things like stress or emotional exhaustion or even burnout. And so if we allow all of our resources to be completely depleted, that's when people somewhat hit a brick wall, and that's when things like depression, in a work environment, our commitment to the organization may decrease. That's not a place that we want to be in. So where resilience comes in is we need to make sure that we are constantly replenishing whatever resources that are being drawn upon throughout the day and throughout the week. And so resilient leaders build resilient teams. And so what we're going to talk about today is some of the things that may draw upon and deplete the resources, both for you personally as well as for your team, but also how do we make sure that we start with an even higher level of resources so that we can recover from whatever demands that we may have or whatever resource losses, and then we're better prepared to be able to meet the demands of life. So I'm going to skip ahead, and I just want to very briefly talk about teams. If we were in a face-to-face environment, I would ask you guys to tell me what is a team. But for these purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what a team is. So a team is anytime you have two or more individuals that have different roles and responsibilities that work together socially as well as interdependently to accomplish tasks and to meet common goals. This definition is really important. I think it's always important to start with this because I want us to get a baseline of the difference between a group and a team. I tend to think about teams and groups on a continuum such that you have team over here and group over here. And depending on where you are on that continuum, you may be more so of a group. And a group is really just a collection of individuals that may have different goals. They're working on different tasks. Maybe they have overlapping roles and responsibilities. And because of that, they have a lot of difficulties. And so we as leaders, our purpose and our challenge is to make sure that we are moving people from being a group to being more of a team. And so to do that, we need to make sure that our people have a common goal. We need to make sure that they understand what their tasks are, that they understand their roles and responsibilities, and also that they have interdependence. And interdependence is really like the opposite of independence. Independence is a situation where everybody within the group can get their work done independent of other people. But in a team, it suggests that we have some mutual reliance on other people in the group. And so my output makes up somebody else's input and vice versa. Somebody else completes their part and they give it to me and so that I can do my part. And so from an interdependent standpoint, I can't be the highest and my highest and best self if other people on my team can't be their highest and best selves. Mickey, I think you said you couldn't see my slides. Let me try to share my screen again. All right, great. Sorry about that. So that was the definition of a team. Now, let's talk about this. Let's talk about conflict, because conflict is something that really is inevitable when we're working on a team. And as a leader, we need to make sure that we are aware of the potential as well as the prevalence of conflict that occurs in our teams. But it's just as important to know that conflict exists, but you also need to know the type of conflict that is occurring either between you and your teammates or between the teammates themselves. And so in the academic literature, what we understand is that there are at least 4 different types of conflict. The first conflict is what we call task conflict. Task conflict is really disagreements over what are we going to do. It's disagreements that are based on ideas, viewpoints, or opinions. We're working on some kind of challenge at work, and one team member prefers solution A, somebody else prefers solution B. There's nothing personal about that. We just have a difference of opinion of what needs to be done. The literature suggests that this type of conflict, this task-focused, idea-based conflict, is really good for team performance. And so the opportunity for us as leaders is how do we create an environment where we actually encourage task conflict? Things like intellectual friction, debate. We want people to have their own opinions, and we want them to bring those opinions and feel comfortable bringing those opinions to the table so that we can come up with our highest and best solutions to problems and make better decisions. The challenge is sometimes task conflict can then devolve and trigger the second type of conflict, and that's what we call relationship conflict. Relationship conflict is typically has nothing to do with the work that we're actually doing. It's disagreements based on personal incompatibilities. One person's an extrovert, somebody else is an introvert. Somebody comes to work and they're talking about their political affiliation. There's such thing as microaggressions where, let's say for instance, there's a team where it's primarily men and there's one woman on the team, and the leader of the team asks the woman to take notes or to go and get coffee. That's what we call a microaggression. And again, it has nothing to do with the work, but it's something that stimulates relationship conflict and causes people to shut down. It causes people to be angered, frustrated, and annoyed. And when that happens, this shuts down productive work within our teams. The third type of conflict is what we call process conflict. So process conflict are disagreements based on how to actually get the work done. And it's important to distinguish process conflict from task conflict, because process conflict is about delegating tasks. Who's going to do what? It's about how do we share resources within the team in order to get our work done. So let me make sure I distinguish this from task conflict. Task conflict is just disagreements over what to do. Process conflicts are disagreements over how to get it done. So going back to my previous example, we may have had a conflict over what to do, solution A or solution B, but we may come to agreement on solution B is the right thing to do. The process conflict may come in when we disagree over who's going to start the project off. Amber, I want you to start the project off. And Amber's like, no, I always start the project off. Why don't you start the project off? Because usually when I start the project off, I end up doing most of the work. And then when I give it to you, then you don't really have anything productive to add. And then that causes me problems. And so it's important to have both agreement over what to do, but also agreement over how to actually get it done. And making sure as leaders, we properly equip and give people resources through which they can get the work done. Because the worst thing that you can do is give a team member a mandate, but don't give them the resources through which they can actually get it done, because that's going to cause conflicts and that's going to drain the personal resources of that individual. And the last type of conflict is what we call goal conflict. So goal conflict are disagreements over why are we even doing this in the first place? And so as a leader, we need to make sure that people within the team are very clear on what is the overarching purpose? What is the vision? What is it that we're really trying to accomplish? Because sometimes we can have our teams working on so many individual things that we really miss sight of the overall big picture. And if we're not in agreement on the big picture, then these types of conflicts will totally drain the resources of the team, leaving them depleted, and then that can jeopardize the entire mission of the organization. So again, as a recap, 4 types of conflict. Task conflict is disagreements over what. Relationship conflicts are disagreements over the people. Process conflicts are disagreements over how. And goal conflicts are conflicts over why. So this is a point in the presentation where I really want you to take a few seconds. Let's take 30 seconds. And I want you to think about maybe the last conflict that you had at work, working in your teams. And I want you to get that conflict in mind. Who was involved in the conflict and what was the conflict about? Take a second to think about that. Now, I also want you to think about maybe a conflict that you had outside of work. Maybe it's a conflict with a significant other. Maybe it's with a parent, a spouse, or sibling. Think about that for a second. Think about who was in the conflict and what was the conflict about. Now that you have those 2 types of conflict in mind, I want to ask you, what was the source of that conflict? Was it a conflict over an idea? It wasn't personal. It was just over what to be done. Was it a conflict over the process? You were in agreement over what needed to be done. You were just in conflict over who was going to do what, and did you have proper resources? Was the conflict really about bigger picture, where it just felt like the other person just didn't get it? We don't need to be doing this at all. Or was the conflict really personal? It was me and this person is just not getting along personally. And so the reason why that's important is that if you don't know the type of conflict you're having, it's going to be highly unlikely that you're going to ever be able to resolve it effectively. And so maybe prior to this presentation, you've typically grouped and lumped all types of conflict in one bucket, and you just say, we're in conflict, or we're having disagreements, or, my friends say we're beefing. So if you don't know really what is underlying the conflict, you're not going to resolve it. And what's going to happen is that you're going to continue to trigger and re-trigger the conflict. Or what might happen is that you have a relationship conflict that then spurs task conflict. So again, let's say, for instance, Jerry Ann and I, we just don't like each other. I love Jerry Ann, but let's just, for teaching purposes, let's say, for instance, we just didn't like each other. Well, that type of conflict can then go into task conflict because I don't like Jerry Ann, maybe I start shooting her ideas down when we're in team meetings. Not because her ideas are bad, but it's because I don't like her, or I'm trying to make her look bad amongst other people within the team. Or if we're having a goal conflict and people don't understand really the big picture, they keep asking questions and triggering task conflict that really slows down the team and drains the team of their resources. So as a resilient leader, it's going to be really important for each of us to personally understand these types of conflicts and then model the behavior that we want our teammates to exhibit when they're engaging with each other, as well as when they're engaging with us. So what does that look like? That may look like us taking the time out when we sense that there's some disagreement. And we may say, hey, John, let's take a second. I feel like we're having a disagreement. John, do you agree with that we're having a disagreement? And John may say, yeah, I do feel like we're having some tension. And you may say, well, John, I feel like this is a process conflict, meaning I feel like we're having a disagreement over how to actually get the work done. Do you feel like I've given you enough resources to be able to do this job? And so by doing that, actually naming and pinpointing the conflict puts us in a much better and much more effective place to be able to resolve our conflicts quickly as well as effectively. And then hopefully we can learn something from that conflict that we can then utilize to be more effective in the future. And then going back to my example about the resources, modeling and engaging that type of behavior may also, because of the learning that comes from it, make us start with a higher baseline of resources such that it makes us more resilient to any types of disruptions that may happen in the future. So one of the important things, I'm going to kind of skip ahead to kind of one of the things that's really the heart of this presentation is psychological safety. Psychological safety is something that we've been studying in the organizational literature for a couple of decades, been popularized by researcher at Harvard, Amy Edmondson. Psychological safety is the extent to which people feel comfortable taking interpersonal risks within their team. It's an environment where people trust that other people within their team are not going to undermine them, not going to shame them. Other people within the team have their best interests at heart. It's an environment where team members give each other grace so that they can be their authentic selves. This was something that Google recently learned when they researched all the teams within the actual organization, within the company of Google, because they were really interested in what were the primary predictors of high-performing teams at Google. Their thought was, if we can understand those factors that lead to high performance, we can then replicate that through training and development throughout the organization, and then maybe share that with our partners. So they engaged in this year-long research project, and that's what they found was that psychological safety was the #1 predictor of high-performing teams within the organization. And so the key to building a psychologically safe environment is making sure that people don't feel threatened when they are at work and working in their teams. And that's our job as leaders. So what do we mean by threats? Threats are potentially risky behaviors that come up in everyday, work that we're doing in our team. So it's behaviors such as admitting a mistake when you made a mistake, and feeling as though your teammates are not going to berate you, or the leader's not going to berate you because you made a mistake, #1, and 2, you owned up to that mistake. And that's something that we want from our teammates, is that we want an environment where if you make a mistake, not only do we want you to admit it, but we actually want to celebrate that, because sometimes that's where our biggest learning happens, is when people have these miniature failures and we make errors. The second type of risky behavior is asking for help. Sometimes when we ask for help, we may feel that people will feel like we are incompetent, or maybe we're not incapable of doing the work that's been assigned to us. So sometimes people will suffer in silence when they need help, but they just don't ask for it. The third type of behavior is speaking up, particularly when we see things that may be unethical or may even be illegal within our team. And so we need to feel comfortable that we can speak up about things that are happening. And so it's the job of the resilient leader to make sure that people feel comfortable speaking up. And then the last thing, going back to what we were saying about conflict, people need to feel comfortable challenging each other, questioning the solutions that we're bringing up. When we're engaging in decision making, we need to be able to vet the alternatives that are being surfaced within the team. Because through that intellectual friction, we can come to our highest and best solutions that drives creativity and innovation. And we need to be able to do all these things I just mentioned without feeling devalued, having our words distorted, or feeling like our expertise is being discounted. Because if we do feel like that, people will reject or feel rejected. And when people feel rejected and when their resources are depleted, sometimes they don't leave the organization. They will quit, but they will stay on the team. And what does that look like? And some of you may have seen that. Maybe you've experienced it yourself where you're just totally withdrawn and you don't feel like you can bring yourself to work. And so you're there, you're just getting a paycheck, but you're not engaged. You're not engaged with your team members. You're not engaged with the actual work, and you're certainly not engaged with the client. And that's a bad place to be in. And so as resilient leaders, we need to build this psychologically safe space where people feel maximally engaged and they feel heard and they feel seen. And the extent to which that we can do that, we can build resilience in our organizations to meet whatever challenges that are going to come in the future. Currently, where we're in right now, there's a lot of uncertainty around, particularly those of us at UAB, there's a lot of uncertainty around what's going to happen in the fall, either from an educational standpoint or even from a healthcare standpoint, because we just don't know what's going to happen with this coronavirus. So it's going to be really important that we create a psychologically safe environment for our team members to say, hey, I'm struggling with work from home. Hey, I need more resources through which to do this. Or, hey, I have 3 kids and not only am I doing my UAB work, but I'm also having to be caregiver. I have to be the teacher with my kids and things like that. So the extent to which we can create a safe environment is a resilient environment. So with that, Jerry Ann, I want to open it up for any kind of questions or discussions. I think we're supposed to run to about 9:25. So I want to open it up for any kind of questions or comments that we may have from the group.
Great. If you can put your questions in the chat, we'd appreciate it. Any questions for Dr. Hood? From Eileen, how do you help them feel safe to admit mistakes?
One of the things that you can do is have an open door policy. And, I think sometimes people just pay lip service, but we literally need to have an open door policy where not only is just the door open and, it's kind of like reactive, people can walk in, but no, literally, maybe you want to set up a recurring meeting with each one of your team members where we just have a morning coffee and you have these one-on-one meetings. I think that goes a long way. And just actually stopping by your teammate's office and just say, hey, what's going on, anything you want to talk about. So creating that safe environment where people know that it's not just lip service, I think goes a long way in creating that safe environment.
And Dr. Hood, another question was about where do conflicts of values come in?
Oh, that's a good one. I didn't mention that, but values are really challenging. And I think one of the ways that we can help resolve that is making sure that people understand the values of the organization and helping people understand how their own personal values are in alignment with the organization's values. And so that comes from a strategic planning process, making sure that people are bought in and involved whenever the organization goes through a new strategic planning process. Typically organizations go through a 3 to 5 year planning process. A lot of organizations have an annual retreat, and that's something I encourage all leaders to do is at least once a year have an annual retreat where you and your team members review the mission, the vision, and the values of the organization, and allow people to surface if they have issues with the values of the organization, and then allow them to actually discuss how their own personal values align with those of the organization. If a person's personal values don't align with the organization, then that's probably an imperfect fit, because that person is probably never going to be particularly satisfied with the organization. And so you may need to look at opportunities to help that person find an organization where their own personal values align with those, either of the organization, but even more importantly, of the unit that they work in within the organization.
Thank you. We've got 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. One question is, how do you tell the difference between fearfulness and someone who's just introverted?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think you have to handle that delicately because, sometimes when people are introverted, our overtures to help that person or ask that person to engage in discussion can actually cause them to feel threatened. So I think you need to give people multiple ways for them to express themselves. And so those folks that are extroverted, their way of engaging is typically through vocal, just face-to-face communication. Where some introverted people are super writers. And so they would like to express themselves through writing or other means, through text messaging, Slack, and things like that. So I think you need to give people multiple ways to engage with you. And through that, I think that you can help reduce the amount of fear or intrepidation that they may have. And then the other thing is we just need to check ourselves, because maybe it's the way that we're engaging with others that may put them on the defensive. And so I think going through these self-evaluation and self-awareness types of exercises, things around implicit bias, really understanding ourselves will help us better understand the people that we work with.
Thank you so much. This is the last one, and if I don't get it correct, if you could just unmute. How do you ensure that other team members aren't going to respond negatively? And so I think that means negatively to talking about this, but I might not be sure. So, because you're going to have negativity. So how do you?
I think it's important to understand that none of us can control the behaviors of somebody else. But I think the more that we stay in communication and contact with our team members, the more we observe them, we get a better understanding of what their hot points are, or what are the things that push their buttons. You know, I always say nobody can get under your skin like a sibling, a parent, or a significant other, because they know you, they know what you like, they know what actually sets you off. But that's because they've had multiple interactions with you. And oftentimes when you're in a team where people really don't know each other, it is so easy to do things that trigger other people. But I think going through more interactions with others, you can better predict what things will cause them to be defensive or angered. And then now you can tailor your engagement with them, even if it's task-focused conflict. Because again, we need to have an environment where, you know, if Jerry Ann is doing something that I just don't agree with, I need to be able to speak up and say that, because there are consequences for the team and the organization if we see something and don't say it, particularly in a healthcare environment where patient safety, organizational quality can be jeopardized or at risk if somebody doesn't speak up. The literature is replete with examples of airplanes that fly into the sides of mountains that were piloted by people with decades of experience. And oftentimes when they go back and look at that black box, they surmise that there was somebody in that cockpit that knew something was wrong. That airplane should not have taken off that day because of weather conditions. But because the other person in the cockpit was the more senior person, that person didn't feel comfortable or safe speaking up, because what do I know? This person is a lot more experienced than me. So we need to create the environment where people still will speak up. And sometimes you will ruffle some feathers, but I think you just have to have that confidence in yourself to know, hey, I'm doing the right thing. But then going back and speaking to that person after the fact to let them know that I came from a really good place. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Oh, I think I'm sharing your screen. Let's see.
I probably have to give up sharing.
Okay, thank you. So we touched on a couple of really important topics with teams. So I want to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms to discuss that. Let me get my screen up. And a couple of questions in the chat, we'll make sure that we get you answers to. So slideshow.
And Jerry, while you're doing that, I just want to encourage people, please follow up with me after this if you have other questions or if you want more resources. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn, I typically every day share something about teamwork, collaboration, psychological safety. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I encourage you to connect with me there. Shoot me an email at anthonychood@uab.edu if you have any follow-up questions, and I'll be happy to engage with you. So thank you.
So thank you. And so for those of you who are new, we always want to make sure you've got time to share. So if we're going to break you into some small groups to talk about a couple of concepts that Dr. Hood brought up today, psychological safety, and also the benefit of conflict. So we'll break you in and give you about 8 minutes to share what's going on your teams and come up with a few ideas that we can share with the larger group.